Hello, Border Collie Geeks, and welcome to a new episode. Finally, I'm back recording. It's the 17th of September, and I've been thinking for a while, I should go back recording an episode. And I finally sat down and decided, okay, let's do it. Today is the day. I've been inspired to record this episode by training that I've been doing recently with my Collie Club and also with my own dogs and with some one-to-one students. And this is something I'm quite excited about because it's something I kind of came up with by playing around with, some skills that I had between competitive obedience and other skills you learn here and there and some pattern games. And it just came to me one day that what's missing in a lot of training programs is actually how to do practical exercises to help dogs improving their recall when prey drive or the predatory sequence is actually active, when the dog is into the predatory sequence. And how this is different than training just your basic recalls. So let's start from the very beginning. If you want to know how I train my recall in puppies, so let's go black canvas. There's a puppy that doesn't know anything. They don't know their name. They don't know recall. They don't have prey drive. I mean, they have it. They're dogs. But at the beginning, they're not showing it. So you're starting from the beginning when there's no habits yet. There's no patterns. There's nothing. The way I teach recall is how I explain it in episode 15. I hope I will be able to also link that in the show notes. So if you haven't listened to that one, then go and listen to that one. I recorded that in August 2022. So we're talking about 3 years ago. But pretty much I use still the same concept if I'm training my own puppies or if I'm teaching students. And this is still the same that you will find in the recall module on the Collie Club, all the breakdown of the behavior. So if you have a brand new dog that you've never trained before, that being a puppy, that being a rescue dog, that being a dog that hasn't had any training before, start from the beginning because you need to build the behavior. You need to build the motivation. You need to build the responses that will look like the recall when you call the dog back. And the foundations is something that you always go back to, even if you have done it when the dog was a puppy and then suddenly the dog is an adolescent and they've even forgot what their name is, or they don't know that they should be coming back to you. They start coming back to you and they shoot off in another direction. You always go back to your foundations anytime in the dog life. But if you've done all your foundations and you have proven your recall in class situation, on a walk where there's other dogs, when there is food on the floor, when there is a person going past, if you have already trained all those distractions, and the problem that you still have is that your dog sees something moving, which could be wildlife, a squirrel, a rabbit, a bird, or it could be a person jogging, or it could be, even like a bike. I have used this with dogs that, wanted to chase bikes. We're not going to add cars in here because that's a completely different discussion. But yeah, person jogging can still trigger your dog prey drive, another dog running, of course, livestock that sees your dog approaching and starts running off. But for some dogs, it can be something as a leaf blowing in the wind. Some dogs see the leaves moving and they start going into prey mode. Or anything really that catches dog attention because movement is involved. And your dog starts activating the prey sequence. So they start entering the prey sequence, which we're going to talk about in a second. Then the difficulty is to then break the dog focus on whatever they're trying to chase and get them to come back to you and not pursue the chase. And that's where everyone struggles, me included. That's the difficult one. Tali has been chasing some hares, and I had to start thinking about how do we do this, because hares pop out of nowhere. I don't know they're there. You can't see them. They're hiding in rushes. They're hiding in tall grass. And I need to be able to train and rehearse calling away from a hare running in situation away from the hare, because when the hare starts running and she has already practiced a few times to chase it, it's too difficult for me to train in that situation. When it's happening, you can't train. You could, if you had the long line on, you can grab the long line and you can get the dog to come away from the animal they are chasing. And some dogs at that point don't want what you have to offer. They will not take a toy. They will not take a treat. They will not take what you have to offer, because they are past the point where they want what you have to offer, because they know the real deal is there. So when the dog enter that mode, it's hard. So we have to work ahead in order to rehearse the behavior. So let's talk about the prey sequence. Let's go in order. Let's talk about that prey drive, the predatory sequence. So the predatory sequence is the sequence of behaviors that a dog starts when they're hunting. And we talked about this in an episode already with Tracy. We talked about this in an episode with Simeon Müller. We talked about this already. So go back and listen to those episodes if you want to kind of deep dive a bit more into the prey sequence or the predatory sequence. We're not going to talk about that too much. But what a lot of Border Collies struggle is not the sniffing, which could be the initial part of the predatory sequence, where a lot of Spaniels might struggle. Some Border Collies will, but it's not the majority of them. Is the staring, the stalking, the locking on the prey before they even start the chasing. And some Border Collies are so hard to break that stare. That stare is what puts a lot of dogs into trouble with any behavior that I see. So it could be because another dog is approaching. It could be because because there is something moving. It could be that kind of stare that, get them sometimes to lie down and they won't move. And, I have people coming to me with that problem. Oh, my dog sees dog approaching, they will lie down and their eyes get so strong, I can't get them away from that. And the problem is that if you don't have a chance to practice your dog staring and you calling away, it gets really hard when you are in the moment, when the dog locks into a stare, which is part of predatory sequence in a Border Collie, but they also use in other situations. It's really hard to get them to stare away. And dogs will also not be able to call away because they like to go say hi to a dog, go say hi to a person. But in some ways, that it's easier, unless the dog starts moving, unless the person starts jogging. So it becomes more difficult when that predatory sequence is initiated. So how do we link that initial behavior, the behavior where we just teach the dog how to come to us and what recall means, what their name means, and how fast I want them to come to me and what I have to give them? How do we link that to the recall problems you're having when the dog starts that predatory sequence and they are difficult to disengage from what they want to pursue because they are so much into their instincts that is really hard. It's really hard to break it. So I have thought about this and I have started working on some exercises that are teaching the dog to stare at something very intensively. And if you follow me on social media, you would have seen Kai doing this. So all this starts from a game that I've called the switch focus game. Now, I have learned these games watching other people playing, especially people doing IGP or other kind of bite sports where they teach Malinois to go into prey lock, I think they call it. I can't really remember at the moment, where they stare intensively at a toy and then they teach them to focus on something else or start hill work or sometimes go and get the toy. And I really like the concept of teaching a dog to stare on cue very intensively, with the same intensity that they will be staring at an animal. And I started playing around with that with Kite. I started teaching him to stare on cue. And I haven't introduced a stalk as much. You will see some people doing stare and stalk to a toy on the floor. I mean, I've seen that used from other people. It's not just the people that do IGP. And I'll start teaching to stare on cue. And then sometimes they can go and get the toy that they were staring at, and sometimes they will stare at something else. So I started introducing different cues for staring at something that is on the floor and staring at something that is in my hand, for example. And just by teaching to switch focus from and teach that stare from two different focus points, one that is away from me and one that is on me, I have improved Kite's staring. Kite's is obsessed with the chickens, and it has happened a couple of times that the chickens were kind of going past the training barn and he was doing training with me and he could see them, and he just went into a stalk from a distance and couldn't even cope about taking a treat from me. So I've used the stare back at me, stare back at the treat that I'm holding, to redirect his stare from something that was away from my control, the chickens going past, and me, and something that I had control on. And it was incredible how that worked very easily. How very easily I transferred the staring at a toy or the food out there to stare something that I was having to a real life situation where those were chickens. And then I was asking the dog to stare, because the stare is such a reinforcing behavior for Border Collies. If you put it on cue and you really practice it, stare at something away from me, stare at something that I'm holding, then you're not asking your dogs to stop staring. You're just telling them, stare at something else. So this is where it all started. And I've tried it with a couple of students and they found it much fun. They were having fun with this and they could see how this is going to help for dogs that tend to get stuck into a stare. And I've trialed it with both toys and food, and it worked fantastic with both. With my dogs, I can do it both. So I'm putting a toy out there and I give them a toy, or I put food out there and I give them a toy, or I put a food out there and I give them food. So I played around it, but every dog is different. So we need to go with what your dogs like. If they like food, working for food more, use food. If you like working for toys more, work toys. With Tali, for example, I tried with food and it didn't work as much, so we had to do it with toys, because she doesn't find food as rewarding, or she didn't find food as rewarding. That has changed recently, thankfully. So this was my first game, is just teach the dog to stare at something else. Now, if we go back to the recall, we're talking about the fact that some dogs struggle to recall away if they're staring at something. They can't turn their eyes off that thing. This is where recall training jumps into the game. So I started doing a recall away from a stare at a toy, a recall away from a stare at food, and very, very quickly, the dog's starting to get it. Asking them to stare at something on cue, something that you have control of to start with, and then recall them away from it. And like for any training you do, make sure that your management is in place. You have a long line on. If your dog doesn't, of course, initially, it doesn't respond to that recall training. And with Kite at the beginning, he would not come back. He was like, no, I want that food. And then gradually, with a long line that didn't allow him to go and self-reinforce himself with the food that was on the floor, he started to turn around and come back to me. And then I applied the same thing to chasing. So we started playing games where of course, my dogs know how to chase a treat on cue. That's part of my foundation training. I played a ping pong game a lot where I throw food one way and then I throw food the opposite direction and they chase the food, also called the food chase. So they have a cue that means go and chase the food. I don't just chuck food on the floor. They learn that it's a cue that means you can go and chase that treat. So anything with Border Collie, if it's cued, it's kind of more valuable for them. They like to respond to cues. My dogs even like me to tell them to go for a wee sometimes. It's more rewarding if I tell them to do it than them going on themselves. I'm joking, but just to say that Border Collies do like to be told what to do. That's, they kind of thrive in doing things for you. So if you teach them to go and chase a treat on cue, that's more powerful just chucking food on the floor. And then I started recall away from a chase. So they were chasing food, and I told them to go and chase that. So I activated the prey sequence, and then midway between me and the treat, I would call away. And very quickly, they picked up the game. And of course, the problem with these games is that once they learn them, then you need to up your game. So you need to kind of change environment. You need to change treats. You need to change your toys. You need to practice You need to practice when the dog is in different emotional states. So if you're doing this in your garden, the dog is calm. It's in its own environment. They know the distraction in the environment. They know that you play and do training in the garden. There's nothing out of the ordinary. But if you then take your game and try and do it in different environments, like you go to a park where normally birds land and the dog gets stalky and chasey with the birds, you are going to take your game that asks the dog to focus on you and play the game with you, so concentrate with you, in an environment where normally the dog wants to chase something. You give them something to chase. You practice your recall away from a chase. You practice a recall away from a stare. In an environment when the dog arousal is up anyway. And this is, I think, the other thing that everyone misses in training, is they go from, oh yes, we do it in the garden and then we go out on a walk. And there's nothing in between. Like, you go from lower arousal in the garden to higher arousal on a walk where there's a lot going on. Now, go to a park with a long line in the middle of a place where there's no other dogs, because you go on a time of the day where there's not a lot going on around. Practice in different environments. Don't just go from your garden to the moors where it's full of sheep, or the big park on a Sunday that has too many dogs running around. You need to gradually increase the arousal in the dog while you're practicing your training. And you're not training your dog away from distraction. You take your exercises outside in the environments when the arousal is different, and you practice. And this is where a lot are going wrong. And tell me if I'm right. Think about it. While I'm saying it, think about it. How many times do you go out and you train the exercises for recall and not recall away from distractions? If you have a problem with your dog recalling away from distraction or recalling away from chase, recalling away from movement, and you go out and wait for that to happen in order to train your dog, you have failed already at the beginning of your training, because you're already putting the dog in the most difficult situation, in the most high arousal, and you're asking them to listen to the behavior that for them was very easy in the garden. So you need to find those places in between where you can go and practice your training exercises. And if you are at the level of just practicing whiplash turns, or practicing restraint recalls, or practicing ping pong, or you are at that level until you get to the level when you're practicing stare and call away from a stare, when you're practicing call away from a chase, when you're practicing call away from a toy. And then you go there and practice those advanced exercises in those environments. And this is the most important thing, is don't jump to real life scenario if you haven't practiced all the exercises and you haven't trained your dog, not test your dog, train your dog in environments when the arousal is going to be up anyway. So for them, it's going to be more difficult to pay attention, more difficult to perform behaviors, more difficult to cope with everything. Okay, so I hope that this was useful. I hope I gave you some things to think about. And since I want to help, and I know that Christmas is coming and we all want to go back to do some training, but we also have to think about how we're going to buy all these Christmas presents. I'm going to publish this podcast and I'm going to give a week discount for the first month of the Collie Club. So I'm going to give you a 20% off for a month to join the Collie Club from the day I published this podcast for a full week. So the discount is going to be available for you if you listen to this episode from the 17th. Today's the 17th. I'm going to publish this next Tuesday, the 23rd. I'm going to keep to my Tuesday until Tuesday the 30th. This discount is going to be available. It gives you £20 off the first month of the Collie Club. So you could come and have a look at the recall module and have a look at the switch off games and see if this is helpful for you and you want to, and you can add that to your training. Okay. So I have a few guests coming and talking to the podcast, which I'm hoping you're going to appreciate. I'll try to put at least 2 guests in between here and Christmas. I'm going to try to record or publish 2 episodes a month, even if they're just very quick episodes talking to you about something, answering a question that someone asked me, talking about a dog I'm working with, and all this. And I hope I can maintain this promise, and I apologize if you could hear background noise of a dog whining, but that it's all Tanith, that unfortunately is on steroids and she's hungry from 3 o'clock, and there's nothing I can do about it because she's not going to eat until 6 o'clock and it's only 10 to 5. So this is bad news for Tanith. Okay, I hope you're having a good week. I hope you're having a good September. And as always, if you want to reach out, ask me a question, which I might use for a podcast episode as well, do so on my website. You will find the contact form, or send me an email, or come on Instagram, Martina Border Collie Geek _ no, that's it, Martina _Border Collie _geek. And you'll find me on Instagram, send me a message, and I will use your email for your question for a podcast. So please do, any question, and you just help me keeping going on the podcast. Have a nice week. Bye.